Diana Wiley, and I am your host of Love, Lust, and Laughter. Yesterday, CNN Health wrote an article went live, and it's called Sex Gets Complicated. And I was quoted at some length in the article. And so today my guest, Dr. Carol Queen, she's returning to the program, yay, will help me talk about some of the highlights of this article, about a sex survey from Justin Laymiller. More sex equals less sex. More stress equals less sex. Talking about sex is difficult. That was my part of it. And some people are having more intimate sex. We're going to talk about pushing the sexual boundaries, which is where Dr. Carol Queen can add a lot because, well, Dr. Carol Queen, why don't you welcome to the program, and why don't you tell new listeners what you do? Hello, Carol. Can you hear me?
Oh, hello. Yes. I got you only a half of a sentence, so I wasn't sure it was live. Why don't I tell people what I do? I am the staff sexologist at Good Vibrations. Staff sexologist, honestly, the best job description in the world. And if you spread it out, it also means that I'm the curator at the Antique Vibrator Museum. What a great and fabulous responsibility. And I'm a writer. My most recent book is the Sex and Pleasure book, Good Vibrations Guide to Great Sex for Everyone. On the side, I do other writing, and I'm the co-founder of the Center for Sex and Culture, which is now virtual and not brick and mortar, but it's still floating there in the air when people need it.
And you are also just a really good human being. I've known you for, probably more than 30 years, actually. You helped me out with the very first audition piece I did for the Sinclair Institute and the sex ed video, How to Seduce Your Lover Forever. And that was about 1994 or 5.
Right. I remember working with Sinclair all the way back then too. My goodness,
yes,
memory is so good.
So we've known each other a long time, and I'm so grateful for our relationship. So I sent you a link to the CNN Health article, which went live yesterday, and it has CNN, of course, has a great reach. And I thought that the article actually provided a pretty good outline of things we could discuss. And at the top of the show, I mentioned that the title, Sex Gets Complicated. Well, of course it does in this pandemic, stressful time. But it doesn't have to be so stressful on your relationship. And so we're going to talk about that and why it doesn't have to be so stressful on your relationship.
Or might even open a door to fix some of that if it's been the case, even before the pandemic.
Yes, talk about that because that's absolutely true. And in fact, the CNN piece pointed out that some are actually having more intimate sex. They have extra time together, and they're pushing boundaries. So talk about opening doors, Carol.
Well, back in the 70s, there was a book, I think that I read this in the book Games People Play. And and there was something in that book that jumped out at me, and it had something to do with helping to analyze when people change. People change when they're forced to change, when it's so painful not to change that there just is no way of going forward. And then people change because they can. And I just thought that was such a powerful little statement, this focus on, you can't live like this any longer. I think so many of us, when we think about especially like psychological and behavioral change, stopping drinking or, quitting gambling or whatever it might be, that people think of it as being this painful situation. And so many people are experiencing the pandemic and the quarantines and the constant togetherness that way. But then there's this beautiful out that isn't about pain. It's about realizing that a door is opening. You know, you change because you can. You're inspired to in some way. And I think about the whole COVID and sexuality situation, especially with people who are already partnered that way, because of course some people are having a terrible rough time of it, and not surprising at all given the circumstances. But other people, and the CNN article spoke to this, are pivoting. And that's what I mean by a door opening, this idea that a different set of circumstances might be an opportunity as well as a stressor. Well, yes, and there's even a Chinese character that says that right, opportunity, and what's the other one?
Now I'm blanking on it.
Oh, no.
Oh no, we'll come up with it.
I know what you mean, though. Yeah, I know. I've heard of this.
But opportunity exists for change, and people are having more time together, and they're reprioritizing things. And what's really important? And sometimes they're experiencing stress and realizing that they need a way to cope with it, whereas the amount of stress that they had, 6, 8, 10 months ago might not have impelled them in that direction, but now they are impelled. Now they are, say the last word again. Now they're
impelled, pushed, like moved.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Compelled, yes. Absolutely. So the CNN article quoted the sex survey by Justin Laymiller of the Kinsey Institute, and he was very smart. He started this sex survey in mid-March, and it's continued on. So the article had a lot of data from that survey, and you're familiar with his work, are you? His
yes,
research
yes,
at the Kinsey Institute?
Yeah, the group that's at the Kinsey Institute right now doing the survey research and so forth, I think they're terrific.
Yes, and how great that he had he was prescient that he began to do this sex survey. Well, I was too, along with my husband, by starting to write the book in March. We had no idea that the pandemic would be going on this long, but we.
So you figured you better strike while the iron is hot and get that 1 month worth of book sales.
Exactly.
And it's many more than that.
Yeah. In that CNN article, I talk about non-sexual touch and total body caressing. And the sensate focus exercises have been the mainstay for sex therapists for decades. Sensate focus was a term that Masters and Johnson coined because they felt from their research, their extensive research in the late 50s and early 60s and their books, that too many people were too genitally focused, that we have all these other possibilities from the top of our head to the bottom of our feet, and getting stuck between the legs could be limiting. So one of the exercises in the book, and that I have suggested to numerous couples, is where you and your partner slow down and gradually touch each other in intimate ways in successive stages of arousal. And the first couple of times, I actually suggest that intercourse is taken off the menu. Mm-hmm. And that really helps. That really helps a lot of men with performance anxiety, with erectile dysfunction, and so on. Slowing down in general can be so very helpful, and massaging each other. And you talk about that in Good Vibrations. I'm sure.
Right, because and not only for the performance anxiety challenge that many men or people with penises have, but my experience at Good Vibrations is that it's very common for women to come in and say that they are having trouble with orgasm during intercourse, and when you talk to them a little bit, what you glean from that is there's not enough touch, quote unquote foreplay. You know, I always put quotes around foreplay because I want to remind people that for many people that is their play. That it's not for in front of anything. It's what they do for satisfaction. But the
yes, that's right.
Intercourse arousal activities. Arousal activities is another great way to speak about them. There just isn't enough of them in the pattern that they've established with partners who are in a hurry to have some fun, and that's understandable, but isn't arousing these women enough. Not enough clitoral stimulation, not enough awareness of the clitoris at all. Sometimes even today in 2020, that's the case for many couples. And that if you go to sensate exercises, the other thing that does, this slow down focus, this whole body focus, it brings all the nerve endings from the entire pleasure feeling body into the experience that eventually might get genital and focused on the genitals, but doesn't have to. And honestly, maybe shouldn't start that way. Should start at the lips with the hands. It should be a build-up. And so that's why I'm so glad you focus on those sensate focus exercises, because for so many people, they are an absolute game changer. And it really illustrates how many people just rush through sex.
Yes, and in the pandemic, we actually have more time, many people do, to experiment, to explore, to find out what it's like to slow down and touch different places. You mentioned intercourse and the clitoris, and I'm thinking that it was just about 4 days ago, I think, that Cher Height died. And
I had not heard that. Rest in power.
Oh, really? Okay.
No.
Yes. She died she was only 77. She lived in England the last few years. Well, let's back up and share with listeners, because you and I remember very well when her book came out, 1976, and it was quite revolutionary.
Very much so.
Yeah, because, well, she said, and a lot of men, I don't think, liked this, but she said, women don't need men. And her emphasis was all about the clitoris, which, of course, has no other function than for pleasure, and it has more nerve endings, 6,000 to 8,000, than the penis has, about 4,000. But she was the first, and she did a survey of about, I think it was over 3,000 women. What do you remember about Cher Height and how what do you remember about her and her messages?
Well, she definitely reached out to more women, I think, than almost any survey research had up to that point.
Yes.
And she didn't simply, so much survey research is done by academics or researchers, but who go for convenient samples like their patients, their clients, or their students. And Height was, within the sexology and academic world, Height was pretty controversial, not for the same reason that she was among the guys who wanted her to stop talking about clitorises, but because she too did a convenient sample, but she did it via women's magazines, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
And people were like, "Wow, you can't survey people in women's magazines." Well, look at the way people are surveying now. It's all internet and SurveyMonkey now. Hardly anyone tries to do the kind of, random sample survey that will be generalizable to the entire population. I have a degree in sociology. That is hard to do. And so people may have scoffed at what Heidi did, but she reached women who were older than the students who so often were part of the experience. She reached women who were in different stages of their lives and of partnerships. And the gist of her book was, I mean, if I had to really spin it down, it was like, you don't know what women are thinking and experiencing. Listen to them right now.
Exactly.
So many voices came through. So many different experiences that women can have. And I think that's important for women to remember, too. So many people think that there's sort of a normal way for things to be. Our experiences are very diverse, have to do with so many different things. And I think that message, it could have been more diverse. It always can, of course. I'm sure that it wasn't, racially balanced in the way that we would have a better view of today. But it brought women to a space where they were invited to talk about their experience, and that was so important. And of course, 70s feminism was the surrounding situation, so it's not surprising that is what came of it. And you're right, it was talked about for years.
Yes, and the controversy remained for years. Even the way she did the research, which you touched on a little bit. And now it's very common, and of course with the internet, researchers can reach thousands and thousands of people in not very much time. But I agree, it was very useful that she reached older women too and got some of their input, because a lot of academics only survey college age kids because those are their. They have classes. They teach classes to them, and
they're right in
easy
front
group.
of them, so they go ahead and give them a survey. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, yes.
And,
so that's yes. Go ahead, Carol. Go ahead.
It was such a time of generational change. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that getting older women in the net was especially important at that time. Not that that's not the case now. The generations are always, growing and turning over power and cultural identity to the next generation and so forth. But when I think about my mom's generation, my mom was born in 1920, and the experiences that I had, born in 1957. And of course, there are several generations of adult women past us now, right? But the idea that she actually got some of that, I think she got a little bit of a snapshot of change at that time. And looking back, I think that was a really important thing for her to have done.
Absolutely. And she put the focus on the clitoris, which is important. And a lot of men were not very they weren't clitorate.
They didn't know where it even was.
I know.
Oh yeah, I remember in the 70s having to do a few, one-on-one workshops, which is a valuable thing to do. I mean, that's part of the sensate focus that you talked about before. I mean, if somebody is not really sure what kind of touch or where the touch should be, communicating with the person whose body you're touching is a very wise thing to do. It's not that everybody should know the map in their head, because some of our maps are a little bit different. Not a bad idea to know the general area to look for, but getting your partner's own feedback, there's no substitute for that.
There's no substitute for that, and that comes with slowing down and really listening to your partner. Probably when you're having sex is not the best time to have a full discussion about this. It's better, and it might even be better to have the discussion, which can be very hard for people, but to have it maybe on a car drive. We can still get out in our cars and drive, and so maybe on a car drive or maybe over dinner, perhaps at home, but not in the bed, but to have a discussion. And of course, it's so hard that was part of what I spoke about in the CNN article that went live yesterday. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. That talking about sex is so difficult. I mean, so many people did not have parents who talked about sex, so they don't have and they feel awkward and uncomfortable, and maybe there was trauma in their history, and so then that makes it even more complicated. A lot of women, and I know you can speak to this, a lot of women don't know what they want until they start to masturbate and use sex toys, and we're going to get into that because you have so many areas of expertise, Dr. Carol Queen, but sex toys is right at the top of the list in terms of your expertise, I would say. Right up there, because you are the main sexologist, the head sexologist for Good Vibrations.
Right.
Yeah. So, but talking about sex, so I, in my book, Love in the Time of Corona, I have a sex menu that it can also be downloaded now at free at my advice website, deardrdiana.com. But the sex menu has a list of all kinds of sexual activities that people can do, and you can check whether you want to be the giver or the receiver, and then you can check whether it's yes, no, or maybe is in the middle. And this can launch a lot of conversations, and it helps people because they don't always have the words. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And even just getting into the conversation. I mean, because it's such a central part of so many people's lives, sexuality, and yet it's true we don't learn a common language. Some of us use words that other people might find shocking or offensive or too clinical and not sexy enough. You know, you almost have to calibrate your language for best effect. I wrote about that in Exhibitionism for the Shy and tried to get people to think about what way would be most comfortable and engaging for them to talk. That's a good start, because then at least the discomfort of having languages that don't match each other, you know, one person is using 4-letter sexy words and the other person is, you know, sounding like they have a white lab coat on, and it doesn't sound like they're having the same conversation together. So if people can even make that one of the things that they negotiate or check in about. And also, you know, the thing about not having the sex talk in bed is going to sound so counterintuitive to some people, because for them, the only time a sex word would ever cross their lips is in bed, you know, maybe swearing on the side. Some of us have to swear from time to time to let some steam off, but those are two different uses of sometimes the same words, right? And bringing it out onto into a nice walk, if the air quality ever allows for it again, and or dinner or a drive or what have you, will take the pressure off the people when underneath everything else may still be this performance anxiety. I think that people can be surprised by how easy it can be to communicate about sex if they've never been given permission or support about it before in their lives. When they do get over that hump, wow, you can talk about it like you can talk about other topics. And in fact, that's how I suggest people start. I suggest people say, you know, over dinner, oh my goodness, I read this obituary, Sherry Height died, and part of my is that, and you can, you know, say a few things. It's the news. You know, sex is in the news all the time. It's in the news all the time.
You, yes, your book, Exhibitionism for the Shy, is a classic now. It was published in 95. It was your first book, 1995.
5 years. Hardly seems possible.
Oh, really? Geez. Okay. Uh, but you talk about erotic talk, which is what we're discussing. Yeah. Erotic talk, and you said that this is a form of exhibitionism, and you break it down. What do you want to say? And you have some really good suggestions, like narrate the plots of erotic stories, or reminisce about a past sexy encounter, or make requests to do specific sexual things. And you also say, how do you want to say it? Make a list of your preferred terms for erogenous body parts and sex acts. Yeah, those are very specific, concrete examples. I like them very much, and I think people could do these things if they got past their nervousness and
right there.
If not now, when? Let's do it.
Yeah. When people are thinking about what their preferred words might be, I encourage them to just get a picture of a person, maybe a naked person, a couple of people if you and your partner are of different gender identities, and then just label the picture. Just write the words on there that you like the most, and it's a little art making. Share your art.
Yeah,
and
that's
say,
creative.
Oh gosh,
I like that.
Call it that? I've never heard anybody call it that before. And the other fun little trick, and this was inspired by Elvis Presley.
Oh, really?
I mean, many sexual thoughts at a particular time in our history were inspired by Elvis Presley. Maybe not so much anymore, but in his burning love era, he was a very, very sexy man. But I read somewhere that Elvis called his penis Little Elvis.
Little Elvis, okay.
Little Elvis. That was his name for his own penis. And I just thought, let's all name our parts. Let's just, if saying four-letter words is on any level, challenging or doesn't feel like the right thing to do, just make up some new things to call them then. The main thing is that we communicate, and if you can arrange with a partner to both call somebody's penis Little Elvis, then why not do that if it works?
If it works. And it might make the person who is so unaccustomed to talking about sexual parts or sexual activities, it might make them a little more comfortable. And it also potentially brings in some humor.
It's adorable.
And that can take the pressure off of the anxiety that one might have about performing. I don't recommend, though, that the woman would point at the man's penis and laugh, because that's a different sort of thing.
Very different.
But to bring some humor in.
I would recommend against that. If that's going on in someone's sex life, my hope is that someone has negotiated a BDSM scene and specifically requested it, because under
that's a good idea. Yes,
under non-power play conditions, honestly, that is not a smooth move. It will cause more trouble.
I was attempting to make sort of a joke.
Well, I know you were,
but it's a bad one. But I love it if you can bring it in to the BDSM scene. But the beauty about BDSM is that there is such beautiful communication.
Yeah.
Because there are rules and there are boundaries and they are discussed. Why don't you say a few words about that?
Well, I was going to say that humiliation in somebody's sex life doesn't belong any place but in BDSM, and I just said that, so I think that's a point worth reinforcing. But anything else is abusive, frankly. But that makes it sound like all BDSM practitioners might do that sort of thing. That's also not at all true, because just as you were talking about giving a sort of a sex menu and yes, no, maybe options for people who may not be at all interested in BDSM, the fact is that idea is at the heart of communication about these various kinds of kinks that we use the phrase BDSM to as a shorthand for, because not everybody wants to do all the things.
That's
Somebody
right.
wants to have their penis pointed at and laughed at. It actually turns them on to have that happen. I've met a person like that, as a matter of fact. It was very hard for me to point and laugh because I was acculturated not to do that. But,
yeah.
but for him, that was his thing. But
that was his thing.
Somebody else does not want anything of the sort to happen to them. Instead, they would rather that their nipples be pinched really hard and tugged on. And somebody else wants to be spanked. And someone else wants to be in bondage. But the bondage is only so they can really relax and get very, very aroused when someone else does things to them sexually that you and I might not start by thinking of as kinky at all, right? Just that they might want to be in bondage before having intercourse the way everybody else does outside of bondage. And so the thing about BDSM is it is such a big tent kind of erotic play. Some of the people doing it don't consider it sex at all. They just like to do it, and sex is something else altogether. Sex is penis and vagina, or genital arousal, and this is different for them. So, if any of your listeners are remotely intrigued by any of these things that I've said to try to describe the diverse possibilities of BDSM, I would recommend they check out some material about it, because there's so much to learn, and if you're turned on to this stuff, it's very fun to learn it.
Well, yes, and in my chapter 8, I have reviews of a lot of books and websites, and the Kink Academy, kinkacademy.com.
She's delightful.
You can explore the kinkier side of sex if you're looking, or you want to master your advanced techniques, or you're just exploring.
Or you're just curious. Maybe you've got a friend who hinted to you that they've started to do this kind of stuff, and you have no idea what that even means, and you're not sure you want to ask them specifically. I mean, there's no reason not to learn about sex things that you aren't going to do, or you aren't going to do right now. Knowing about what the variety of sexual possibilities are sometimes really just reinforces how identified we are on with the things that we already know we like. There's nothing wrong with that either.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, the one thing I really want to reinforce when we're talking about sexual variety and kinky play and BDSM and all the things is that talking about them comfortably as we're doing together is not the same thing as assuming that everybody should be doing those things.
Exactly.
It's not everybody's cup of tea. It doesn't have to be. There's no need for it to be. The only time when that might even come up as a thing to worry about is one person's really into something and their partner's really not into something. Let's hope they have some other things they're into together. But sometimes that's an incompatibility that you can't get past. It needs to be taken seriously, but that doesn't mean that those of us who can comfortably communicate about BDSM think that everybody else is just, old-fashioned or slow to catch on to the new stuff. It's not what it means. And if anybody from the BDSM world ever puts anybody down for being too quote-unquote vanilla, they're just being a jerk.
I agree with you. Right? Some people have very hot vanilla sex with maybe just a little bit of dabbling into some of the more kinky kinds of behaviors. I put in the sex menu toward the end of it a number of sexual behaviors that would be considered kinky. And, for instance, these are minor. I'm looking at it right now. Blindfold is that can be vanilla sex, too. A blindfold spanking can also, it's minor kink, right? flogging, domination, submission. These are all in the sex menu. So yes, maybe, no, if you want to be the giver or the receiver, right? Dress up, lingerie, kink attire, naughty sex talk. That should be for everybody, I think. Voyeurism, exhibitionism, threesomes, group sex, fetishes. So, and as I wrote in the book, the sex menu exercise can be quite revealing, and you may want to revisit and revise your menus periodically as your preferences evolve over time. Yes. And that's part of the pleasure of getting to know your partner better, which is the name of that chapter, Getting to Know Your Partner Better. Let's talk more specifically about sex toys, because I have read that retailers, and this was in the September 2020 issue of Cosmopolitan, and they're pointing out that retailers, the big retailers, see up to 250% spikes in sales. They've sold more than 1 million toys since March. So
the pandemic has been good for sex toy sales, sourdough starter, and I'm not sure how much else. Yes, and I'm not trying to make light of what has been such a terrible and devastating situation to so many people, but it's also true that there are many people who are lightly touched, except for restrictions and changes in the way that they are, staying home instead of going to work and so forth, cocooning with a partner, and all of those things really make a difference in terms of people's decisions on how to spend their time. It's a great time to take up a hobby. It's a great time to get more intimate with your partner, and whether someone has a partner or not, it's been a great time to explore sexuality a little, and for that, people often think of sex toys. People who have never used them before have begun to experiment. People who already had a favorite toy have decided they would try a new one and see if they like that any better or different. And I just think this is a silver lining is too glib a way of talking about it, but this is a possibility that there's a door that is open for many people who have decided to take the opportunity. And obviously, I work for a sex toy company, so I have both a little sense of insight about that, and I'm glad to hear it. This, again, does not mean that everybody needs to go run and stock up on toys and use them. If you don't want to, by no means is this a requirement of 2020. But plenty of people need a little relaxation in this frightening time, and solo or partnered sex is one way that many people find they can get their mind off things, relax, go to a place of pleasure, and toys are helping some people with that for sure.
Yes, and including single people who maybe especially single people. And I wanted to talk about men and sex toys, and I do have some of this in my book, Love in the Time of Corona. And I suggest that for men in a heterosexual relationship, that they need to make friends with the toys.
Yeah.
And there are men who feel, I think less and less, but there are still a lot of men who feel threatened or intimidated by sex toys. And their thinking may go something like, why do you want or need a sex toy except to masturbate? When we're together, shouldn't I be enough? I mean, that's the thinking of some men. So I think that men who view sex toys as competition, they may be missing out on some great opportunities to increase their partner's pleasure. So I think it's a good idea for guys to learn how to use different toys, and especially in combination with other ways to stimulate her, your female partner with your mouth, your hands, your penis, and because it's a fact, Dr. Carol Queen, I know you know this, that multiple points of sexual stimulation can enhance the intensity of the orgasm even more.
The blended orgasm, yes, absolutely. And there's a really simple reason for that, and that is that our nerves are basically powering all the physical parts of the experience that we're having when we're being sexual, so that the one point of contact, sexual contact, doesn't give you as much stimulation as if there are more points of contact. So if somebody thinks about just intercourse and the interaction of a penis and a vagina, and then think about a time when they were making out with their partner at the same time, and sometimes how much sexier that can be. You're consuming each other. You're connected multiple. Your hands are on each other's bodies. Your arms are around each other, holding each other. Your skin has sensitive neurology as well. And sometimes just a hand on another part of the body can be enough to add stimulation. So I really strongly recommend that people explore these different sort of blended orgasm erotic sites, the clitoris plus the vagina, the penis plus. Some men have sensitive nipples and don't even know it until somebody reaches up and starts to stimulate them during oral sex. There's so many things that you can do to add, even if you haven't added any vibration or anything in yet. And that, of course, is another way to add stimulation. You know, I think that the idea that that toys are something that a man would have to be jealous of, or am I not enough for you? This really helps us see how certain kinds of sex acts are thought of as the prime way to be stimulated, like intercourse. So many people think that this is the normal sex act, that everybody else but them is enjoying it a great deal, orgasming like crazy and so forth. And when you start to tell people the statistics that no, something like 75% of women don't ever or usually orgasm during intercourse, you know, this is not what the average person believes or thinks. And men who are encouraged to, you know, take so much responsibility for sex and are basically in many cases getting a lot of their information from, you know, lad websites and porn. They're unless they go to the right lad website, and there are some that you know have good information about sex there, but if they go to the wrong one, all they're getting is reinforcement that they need to be. It's got to be them, the size of their penis, how long they last, all of those things, and our sexualities are more nuanced than that. That is not enough information. And so it's no wonder that somebody like that might feel nervous about a sex toy, but those guys have never once thought, maybe I'll just put that vibrator on my penis and see what it feels like. And sometimes when they do, they're like, oh, I see. This is not a sensation that one human gives another. This is a little friendly machine that is doing something different than we do with each other. We're stimulating the same parts, but it's doing it a little differently. It's not only for women. It's a pleasure that many people of any gender might enjoy. And once you take it out of the, you know, I am a man and it's me and only me, and underneath that, of course, is a worry of, am I doing it? Am I doing it enough? Am I pleasing her enough? You know, the nervousness that underlays this degree of responsibility that the gender identity brings along with it. You set all that aside, and everybody gets to relax a little bit, and toys will help with that, because especially
well
everybody
said,
plays
Carol.
with a toy, you know?
Yeah. What was the website that you suggested? I didn't quite hear the name. You talked about going to porn was not such a good idea, and so many men that's their sex education, and it's very poor sex education. But you mentioned a website. I didn't want to interrupt you, but positive website.
So what I would really recommend is that for in particular for younger guys, I just think that the Scarletine website, which is intended for young people in their teens and 20s, you know, through college age in general, is fantastic. It is full of discussions. It's full of information. It's just great. It's not an explicit website as far as porn is concerned, but that is such the generation of going to porn to get their sex ed. You know, this is a generation that's smart enough to know that the sex ed that they got in school is not in fact education about sex at all. So they go someplace that they think that it is. But of course, porn is not intended to be educational. It's intended to be exciting and
entertainment.
When it succeeds, it's an entertainment medium. So the other thing that I like to suggest that people do is go to the website of the Feminist Porn Awards, which some people will think sounds like an oxymoron to begin with, right? Feminist porn, feminist porn, and it's got a lot of links to and suggestions of specific movies, things like that. The awards aren't happening for the last couple of years, but their website is still there and has a lot of women-centered porn that, for someone who has never tried to look at that before, look at that stuff with an eye to see what's different about it and what people seem to be doing and enjoying in those movies. And it's fairly eye-opening, I think, to somebody who's never looked at that kind of material before. And of course, there's also I'm not 100% sold on the name of this website, but I really love what Cindy Gallup is doing, the Make Love Not Porn site, which encourages people to send in their own real, not entertainment-based clips. And when you start to see stuff like that, you learn a lot. You realize that there's lots of different ways that people enjoy themselves and get off. And that's, I think, really permission-giving to those of us who think there's supposed to be one way to do it. No, there's not. There are a bunch of ways to do it. And if you're bored in quarantine, this is the time to start learning about them and exploring them.
Yes, and, you know, learning about things, including through these websites, and I'm going to ask you, Carol, if you'd be good enough to send me the links when we finish the show to Scarletine and the Feminist Porn Awards and Make Love Not Porn. Well, I think I can find that one, but I want to put it in my show notes.
Great.
Yeah. So, but, you know, we do better when we have more knowledge. We have more sexual confidence when we know more. And a small study was done years ago about sex therapists wondering if they had better sex. Well, the conclusion was that we do because we have more knowledge and therefore less anxiety about sex. Yes. It helps so much. And, of course, there's a big connection between self-confidence and sexual confidence, positive connection. But certainly learning more about sex, I have a whole chapter for that in my book, Love in the Time of Corona. Learning more about sex. It's a real aphrodisiac in a way, knowledge, having more knowledge.
Well, it helps you get new ideas. It helps you troubleshoot anything that hasn't been entirely successful for you in the past. That's very useful. People who think they don't like one thing or another, and then they come to find out that the person who introduced it to them did it really wrong. That happens.
Yes.
Not all of our initial experiences about sex tell us what sex could possibly be like. And we have to have our minds open to what it might be like to experience it in different ways, rather than be stuck with the way that we've experienced it. I mean, that doesn't mean we have to do all those ways, but just understanding that our own experience so far is what it is so far, and it's probably limited by some factors. And do we want to overcome those and do some different kinds of sex? Well, maybe some of us do. That's a great goal for many people, but it's not required. And it's, I think, so important for us to remember that any information that we got in sex ed was not, under almost any circumstance, designed to encourage us to go have sex that way, because there isn't information about how to have sex in sex ed. That's not what it is. It's about learning about what some of the risks are, some of the things that are important to know, but it doesn't add up to a recipe book for going and having sex. That's what I think is so challenging and ironic about people who are anti-sex ed. Maybe they never had any at all in their lives, because they seem to think it's about teaching people to have sex. Anybody who's gone through a sex ed class in high school knows that's not what it is. But when we're adults, we deserve that kind of knowledge. It's another conversation to have about whether people under 18 deserve that knowledge. That's a different talk, and many people argue about it a lot. But once somebody's turned 18, they deserve the knowledge they maybe thought they were going to get in sex ed but didn't, because now it is to everybody's best interest that they learn how to have satisfying sex, or else their relationships will have problems. Their ability to please each other will be compromised by lack of knowledge. So that's why I think sex ed is so very important. And we've got to take it into account.
I think it's so very important too.
I'm so glad you put a chapter in your book.
Yeah, but there's so little emphasis on pleasure. You mentioned the word satisfaction, but yes, and pleasure. Because sex can bring so much pleasure and give us such a relief, and can help us with stress and anxiety. I mean, it's proven that having more and better sex deals very well with stress and anxiety that we're experiencing, particularly in this pandemic. It's a really fun way to even. What did you say?
And pain conditions even. I mean, pleasure is so powerful, and I, my heart really hurts for those people who have never had the opportunity to really explore the degree of pleasure to which they are, natural born. But just because we're born to be pleasure experiencing creatures doesn't mean that we all have had the experiences that got us, that unlocked that particular door. So I really want to encourage people, however they take that on, not to be afraid of pleasure, and to understand that it is there for them and will help them enjoy their lives, even if their lives are, compromised by COVID right now, right?
Yes, and to have that little bubble of pleasure and satisfaction is essential, and we'll get much more of the dopamine and the endorphins and the oxytocin, and that counteracts the cortisol and the adrenaline, which is overrunning so many people, so that they're feeling extra stressed because of all of these high levels of cortisol and adrenaline that come at this time. So sex is a wonderful way to combat stress and deepen the relationship. And of course, you and I are such sex positive women, and we are sex educators, both of us. And because even as a sex therapist, I find for so many of my clients, we have to do well, first of all, we have to do psychotherapy before we can do sex therapy because they're so angry with each other. They couldn't even imagine going to the bedroom.
Yeah.
But then, but then also to do some sex education because a lot of people don't know very much, and especially I have clients from India, and there's virtually, I think it's starting to improve, but there's virtually no sex education in India, and so to the point where I brought out my little hand puppet. This is before the pandemic when I saw people in person, although I could do it over Zoom. I just haven't done it yet. But the hand puppet that shows the vulva and the clitoris and the G-spot, you know what I'm talking about.
The wondrous vulva puppet.
Yeah, yes. Very useful in terms of educating because this one guy had no idea about the clitoris, where it was and what it was for.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I think that the idea that sometimes people need to be started at a very basic place. I mean, this sort of goes against the whole American we're exceptional idea, and we all know play, don't we? Kind of idea. But honestly, when I think about my mother's understanding and her generation, there have been generations of people, some of whom are still alive, some of whom have been, in our lives, who had it just that bad as far as information access was concerned. It's not just other cultures' issue, although many cultures have these issues in their different ways. It's been ours too. And even today, in a much more sex positive time than I grew up in, there is still so much that is taboo or so much opprobrium, so many incorrect ideas. There's still a lot of junk to clear out before we can just put our sex toys of choice in the drawer. I just made a drawer analogy that didn't really work all that well, but
no, it's good. It's all good. Dr. Carol Queen, we're almost at the end of the show, and I want to mention that we've talked about your book, Exhibitionism for the Shy, but the Sex and Pleasure book that you wrote is excellent. It covers like everything. and your Good Vibrations, the goodvibes.com is the website for Good Vibrations. Carol, I just love having you on this program as a guest because you bring so much information and you say it in such an articulate, interesting way. So thank you, Dr. Carol.
It's always so nice to talk to you, Dr. Diana. It's big fun. We are wide-ranging in our interests, and I hope that people listening are inspired by that on some level. And if people want to follow me, I just want to let them know that I'm on Twitter at Carol Queen, on Instagram, although I'm not using it much yet, but I will, at Carol Queen PhD. And I've got a page on Facebook, too. I can't even keep track of all of that. But if people can find me out there if they want to look me up and follow me or any of that.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Carol. And I'm sending you, the listening audience, we're sending all of you lots of good wishes for good sex and good erotic talk. Yes?
That's right.
All right. Thank you, Carol. We'll have you back soon because I just love having you on this program. Love, lust, and laughter. Goodbye, everybody.
Happy feet, happy feet. Oh, I love it, happy feet.